Day 47 to 1:23 p.m. Imelda Avenue, Parañaque, Metro Manila. The sudden change in the situation totally turned the common sense upside down of both the soldiers and survivors alike. Since the start of the apocalypse, it had been a common sense to everyone that no matter how strong or large the infected was, it was all over once its head, brain or even just the brainstem was damaged enough. And yet, the infected that suddenly mutated in front of their eyes became a total exception to that rule. What in the F***ck is this F***ck? Hey, watch your mouth. The ever foul-mouthed and shameless Joseph could not help but run his mouth as he contended with the seemingly immortal infected. As these infected did not die even after their heads were lopped off, he started to grab them despite how disgusting their bodies were and pushed them off the flyover. His body's abnormal endurance and thick skin as an evolver was really applicable in this situation. The normal evolvers, even strength types, would not be able to handle skinless infected as well as him in a whim. He was too pissed off with what was happening that he stopped caring whether they looked disgusting or not. RV reprimanded Joseph about his swearing, but it was unlikely that the latter's mouth would stop soon. After all, instead of decreasing, the seemingly immortal infected were increasing. Besides the two, Jason and the other members of their team were also struggling to deal with the infected that already climbed up the flyover. On the other hand, Roland's and Nikki's were also struggling with the same kind of opponents. This is looking bad, isn't it? Nikki said to Roland with a tinge of worry in her voice. It just doesn't just look bad, it's already worse. Roland replied as he kicked away the infected in front of him. The squeaky sound and soft but disgusting sensation as he kicked the exposed flesh of the infected made the hair on his arms stand up. As he replied, he noticed Joseph grabbing another infected by its shoulders and trying to push it off the flyover. He then saw that flailing arm and legs of the infected. Joseph! Don't throw it immediately, Roland shouted and grabbed the sheathed butcher knife tied to his waist. What? Joseph was startled by the sudden call and lost grip of the slippery infected. It immediately tried to bite him. OSH*T. Joseph cursed and hurriedly grabbed the infected by its neck while he was pushed down to the floor. By then, Roland already arrived and with wide heavy swings, he dismembered the infected's right arm. He then proceeded to dismember the remaining limbs from the joints, causing a splatter of blood. F***ck. Can't you startle me like that, and if you're going to do something like this, get the sh*T off me first. Joseph cursed as he pushed away the limbless infected that was unable to move anymore. But you can handle that much, right? I don't think these infected can bite through your thick skin. Roland said as he observed the surroundings. F***ck. Joseph's foul mouth could not be stopped anymore. However, it seemed that his mood became lighter as he looked at the infected that was still trying to reach him but was not able to. What you did is really effective, but really, I prefer an infected woman over me than this guy here. You're sick. Really, in the head. Roland said with half-closed eyes and ran off to deal with the other infected. Seeing Roland go away, he hurriedly grabbed the male infected by its neck, broke it and threw the infected over the railings of the flyover. The two teams started to implement the method Roland thought of. They dismembered the limbs of the immortal infected before throwing them off from the flyover. Seeing their methods, the other survivors and soldiers started to imitate them. The process was more tedious, but in the least, those that were thrown off that way would not climb back. Fortunately, the limbs that were dismembered from the infected, although moved and twitched violently for a few seconds like a detached lizard tail, stopped moving. If not, it would be a very horrendous thing. On the other side, the snipers had easier time after the change happened. The flying infected moved less erratically and tried to charge forward like berserk beasts. It became easier to predict their movements and the snipers managed to get more hits than misses. May also managed to hit the leader type with bat wings straight on its forehead. The infected crashed on the ground in great momentum after falling from about 100 meters in the air. Due to the sea of infected in the ground, she did not manage to witness its end, but with that height, its fate was already closed. She proceeded to shoot the other flying infected while being protected by Odalina and her daughters. However, she could not help but notice something odd. Not the sky that turned dark or the sudden change with the infected. But, "Mama!" Iola called out as she raised her hands forward and created a barrier to her side. Bam! Sizzle! A skinless mutated infected crashed into the barrier. Bam! Crack! Abigail, who had already transformed in her white cat form, gave the infected a devastating kick. However, that was not the only one. Bam! 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 Sizzle! Iola was forced to create a larger barrier as several more of these infected charged towards the direction of the three. Young Miss Odalina retreated beside May, Abigail and Iola while panting. Although it was not that noticeable, Odalina had been running around dealing with the climbing infected just in this area of the flyover. "Odal, these infected are targeting us, aren't they?" May said while frowning. She had noticed, but there were more infected coming towards them than the others. If it was just Iola, they would not feel that it was strange since it would not be the first time, but no, even Abigail, Odalina and her was being attacked relentlessly. The attacks were too persistent that Arvi's and Roland's teams already moved around their position to deal with the infected while the May and the snipers dealt with the flying infected. "Watch out!" A shout from a soldier was heard and May suddenly felt danger. She turned her head towards the source of danger by reflex and saw several flying infected with exposed flesh and glowing red eyes sweeping towards her. The speed was very fast that no one was able to react. Then, everything slowed down on her sight. Her bullet time activated at the last moment. The closest infected was seen clearly in her eyes, and it was the very same infected she had just shot down. In fact, aside from the gunshot on its forehead, its skull was smashed heavily and it should have stopped moving already. She stepped to her left side, allowing the first infected to sweep past her while she reached for the military combat knife on her waist with her left hand. It was then that she saw some black smoke by the nape of the infected that flew past her. Since the surroundings had already been dark since the black clouds blanketed the sky, the black smoke was very hard to see. If not for that she was rather too close and the scene was slowed down, she would not have seen it. Since she did not know if she was hallucinating, she let go of her sniper rifle, letting it hang on her body and her right hand sweep towards the black smoke, touching it. At the moment her hand and the smoke made contact, the smoke vanished like illusion. But, the skinless hybrid mutated crashed on the road and stopped moving. She was surprised, but there was no time to daze about. The other flying infected was already near. With the training Odalina gave her and the ability her eyes had, she was able to dodge the attacks of the flying infected. At the same time, she saw that each of them had that black smoke on their napes. She managed to touch some of the infected, but not all. The smoke she touched vanished, but those infected did not stop moving. One of those infected without the smoke on its nape had one of its wings caught on a protruding rebar on one of the hastily made bunkers. The wing was ripped and the infected crashed onto the railing without falling off. A group of soldiers hastily restrained it and cut off its limbs and wings. They were about to pick up the limbless body and throw it off when they noticed that it was actually not moving at all. Turning over the body, they realized that it smashed its head on the railing due to the speed of its charge. This left everyone flabbergasted as to what was happening. Day 47 to 1:39 p.m. Control Tower, Ninoy Aquino International Airport, Parañaque, Metro Manila. Ho! The demonic voice of the being on the other side of the portal could be heard. "Does something matter, O Great One?" The leader of the hooded figures asked, noticing the amazement in that tone. "The primary goal of your mission here is a lady with beautiful visage and the people around her, are they not?" "Yes, O Great One." The leader was confused as to why the being in the portal asked, but he still answered truthfully. "Interesting. To encounter a body of void among mortals. Not to mention, a woman detached from world fate and destiny." Hearing that, not only the leader but all the hooded figures were obviously flabbergasted. "O Great One, the body of void, and detached from fate, is the Great One not mistaken?" Stalker could not help but ask. He then felt his neck tighten. "Do you, insignificant ant, dare to question me?" The Great One glared at Stalker that had already started to get lifted off the floor with an invisible force that continued to choke his neck. "This lowly servant implores, O Great One, to forgive my insolent subordinate." The leader hurriedly kneeled down and asked for forgiveness. Hearing that begging, Stalker fell down back to the floor in a coughing fit. "You should discipline your subordinates more." "Yes, O Great One. I humbly apologize for his unsightly behavior." The leader sighed in relief. Although he also did not totally like Stalker, he was still a big asset to lose. On the portal, the eyes moved as if trying to view the scene outside towards the northwest direction of the control tower. The body of void. A body that rejects all negativities. A body found mostly on deities and goddesses that represented beauty. Just this was enough to make lesser gods and deities to salivate over. With the addition of being detached from fate, her future will be unfathomable if handled perfectly. The eyes of the Great One started to glow with both desire and disappointment. It seems that she had already been tainted, but it does not matter. The eyes then turned towards each of the hooded figures. "I want her. Bring her to me. Succeed and I will reward all of you in exchange." Hearing the command, and that they will be rewarded for abducting a lowly mortal, the hooded figures felt elated. To hear the Great One to purposefully reward someone was a very huge thing for them. Furthermore, not only one of them but all of them, nothing could be said anymore but. They all kneeled down and lowered their heads towards the floor. "The Great One's words is our desire." With those words, 5 of the hooded figures melted into shadows. One shape shifted into a large bird with unsightly face. 2 blended into the surroundings while the last one became bipedal wolf with a muscular body. They all scurried out of the control tower going at a certain direction, the flyover at Imelda Avenue northwest of Ninoy Aquino International Airport. Day 47 to 1:30 p.m. Imelda Avenue, Parañaque, Metro Manila. The infected that strangely mutated into something close to immortal magical zombies had given a heavy toll on the soldiers and survivors. The number of infected below was already overwhelming, and it should have been fine if the mutation did not occur. After the sudden mutation of the large number of pushed the people in full defensive. Furthermore, not only the normal infected that were yet to mutate but also the already mutated ones mutated further, which pushed the danger of the situation even graver. There was also the one hard thing that hindered both soldiers and survivors alike. They were all ill-equipped for a night battle. The sudden darkness that enveloped the whole place that was comparable to night time reduced the capabilities of the soldiers and survivors. Aside from gun-mounted flashlights and portable electric lamps that the soldiers always had, it was not enough to have the illumination they needed in the whole area. Any further and they would be forced to retreat. That was when the strange event happened. 2 of the newly mutated infected that attacked the face of Team Fairy stopped moving like puppets with their strings cut off. It was very strange and illogical from the view of the surrounding people comparing it to the current situation. "Odal. Restrain one. I want to try something. Yes, young miss." May hurriedly shouted as realization dawned unto her. Odalina targeted one of the nearest infected that had just climbed onto the flyover and grabbed its shoulders before it was able to get a stable footing and pushed it to the ground. May then ran over while minding the remaining flying infected at the sky. Seeing that the flying infected did not seem to have the momentum for the next attack, she hurriedly bent down and grabbed something from the nape of the infected Odalina was restraining. What May did was strange not only to the eyes of the people around them but even to Odalina's eyes. They only saw her reach out to the infected, grab the air above its nape and retreated. "Odal, kill it." Odalina was confused to the order but just punched the infected's head anyway, creating a cracking sound that was very uncomfortable to hear. The infected's head was smashed open and Odalina's bone-armored fist was stained with blood. As for the infected, it stopped moving. The people around could not help but deem it unbelievable, but for sure, May had the ability to stop them. In any case, however, there was no way for her to handle all the infected alone. It just made things easier around her, but it was not the true answer to this problem. With the newfound discovery, Despite her confusion, she started to cooperate with Odalina, Iola and Abigail as she disabled the infected in her own way. Amidst that, however, she suddenly felt a tugging feeling and started looking for something nostalgic. "Where are the flying infected?" Odalina noticed and could not help but voice it. May, however, was focused onto something else. Iola was the same. This feeling, she was feeling a little teary. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. Remember not to harm the woman. We might have been tasked to set the stage for her and her companions' deaths, but the words of the Great One should come first. Also be careful not to get spotted by the soulless ones or it will be trouble. The leader along with 4 of the hooded figures conversed as they blended into the shadows and traversed the infected-filled airport with great caution. Why did they have to hide and let the infected do the job in the first place? It was because although they could instigate the infected, they could not control them. Once they were exposed, they would also become target of the infected's relentless attacks. Even the blessings of the Great One had no ability to control the infected but only boost their capabilities. If not for the Great One's orders and the promise of a reward, they would not try to endanger themselves like this. They were not human. Unlike humans that would turn after becoming infected, they would become food for the infected and nourishment to their mutation. Nevertheless, the Great One's order was something that they could not neglect no matter what. The moment they defied him was the moment they sentenced themselves to death. It was not just normal death but the erasure of their existence. Fortunately, aside from 2 of his subordinates, their members had bodies that could hide using the surroundings. "The body of void, huh?" the leader muttered. As the Great One said, it was the physique that belonged to deities and goddesses of beauty. They were beautiful, untainted and seemed like they never aged. This physical constitution was very rare for mortals, but it was not the first time that it appeared among them. In history, not only in one but many different countries, there were women and caused fall of tribes, nations and caused slaughter just because of their beauty. Some were common people that became the love interest of sons of heaven, while some were empresses and queens that ruled over kingdoms. One of the most popular women in this country came from the story of lovers that caused the formation of a volcano after their death. Another known woman suspected with this physique was the female pharaoh that came from the other side of the earth. How did he know? In their organization, records upon records could be found in their headquarters. These records were those that were not recorded in the current history of the world. With a bit of difficulty, they finally reached the flyover. The first one to appear was the leader, Umbra. He was followed by Sniffer, the werewolf, which jumped onto the flyover from the other building that was several meters away, and Stalker, the Tick-Tick, which swooped down despite being fired upon by the soldiers. As for the others, they were on standby. They were not beings that would throw in their cards in one go. They were not humans, and in a sense, their existence was weaker than mortals. It was better to be careful. Upon his sudden appearance and the large ugly bird and the werewolf transforming unto humanoid form, the soldiers and survivors were highly alarmed. It was the typical reaction of mortals. The leader expected it to be like this. However, for some reason, he felt unsettled. Asterisk asterisk. "Who are you people?" Major Lopez shouted with the intent to intimidate. He even moved his hand signaling all soldiers around the newcomers to aim their weapons. The tall hooded man, however, that appeared as if he came from the shadows looked unperturbed by the guns pointed at him, however, and turned his head towards the major. "Major Lopez, is it? It is better if you and your men are to mind your own business or your deaths will be hastened." Major Lopez wanted to retort, but when he looked at the man's face under the hood, all he wanted to say was swallowed back into his throat. The man had no face and only had red glaring eyes. It was as if the hood and long robe he was wearing was just floating in the abyss. In his whole life, this was the first time Major Lopez encountered a being like this that could instill fear in his heart with just a glare. Nevertheless, he could not back down. He was the leader of this operation. Swallowing his saliva, Major Lopez shouted once more. "I will repeat. Who are you people? If you are survivors, we will welcome you, but if not, we will not hesitate to shoot." To that, however, Umbra glared at the major as if looking at a clown. "You won't be able to." Umbra waved his hand around his body in an exaggerated motion. Blood was spilled. The bodies of the nearest soldiers aiming towards Umbra fell down as their heads separated from their necks. More than a dozen soldiers fell down in one sweep. "Yo you! Men! Shoot!" Major Lopez shouted towards the remaining soldiers surrounding the hooded man. Splash! The hooded man did not move, as if letting the soldiers shoot him, but not a single gun was fired. All of the soldiers that was about to pull their trigger of their guns fell down lifeless instead. Behind their lifeless bodies were 4 more hooded figures that seemed to have come out from the shadows emerged. Everyone was frozen in fear. Well, at least, there were 2 people who seemed unfazed. Is it possible that even negative emotions are rejected? Umbra murmured as he turned his head towards their target. Still, he found it strange that the 8-year-old child beside her seemed to not show any sign of fear either. "Lady, we are here to fetch you," Umbra said as he approached in slow strides. Hearing that, Odalina hurriedly stood in front of May, wanting to protect her. "Stay away. The young miss can't be touched by the likes of you," Odalina bellowed, but Umbra was not paying any attention to her at all. "Our great god had taken a liking to you. It should be an honor to you who is immortal." Umbra continued to speak to May. "And what if I decline?" May asked. "Then, your beloved daughters will be harmed. I don't think that you will want that at all." It was a cowardly approach, but mostly effective. He could see the eyes of their target waver. He showed his prowess first by killing the other soldiers and showed his subordinates and their capabilities at the second time. With that kind of display, it would be impossible that their target would not fall into the trap they laid. "Young miss, don't listen to them." Odalina spoke with great determination. It seemed that she would not hesitate to sacrifice herself if needed to. It was all to protect May, Iola and Abigail. Also, it seemed that not only Odalina but the others were also getting ready to fight. Especially Mark's friends. Just what face could they give him if they let May taken away in front of them? To everyone's surprise, however, everyone, stand down. She looked at Umbra without a shred of fear. "I will go." "Young miss, Odal, stand down. This is an order," May said with a serious tone. She then kneeled down and patted the head of Abigail, who started to tug on her pants with worry. "Don't worry. Mama will be back, all right?" Tears suddenly formed in Abigail's eyes. After all, it was almost the same situation where her real mother left her for her to be safe. May hugged Abigail with a gentle expression. She then turned to Iola, whose expression seemed to be calm and unaffected. "Iola, I'll be back. Take care of your sister, yes." To that scene and the words May uttered, Stalker spoke with ridicule. "Return? What return? You." The raspy-voiced man was not able to finish his words as he was glared by almost everyone in his team. May then turned away from her daughters, bringing her weapons. "Lady, you won't need those things anymore. It is better to leave them." Umbra spoke with respect. Their great god was interested in this woman. It would not be wrong to say that she could be their future queen. May then shrugged her shoulders and handed her weapons to Odalina and approached Umbra up to a certain distance. Seeing the May was ready, Umbra signaled for his female subordinate to take May away. Under everyone's eyes, May and the female hooded figure sunk into the shadows and vanished. The werewolf and the large bird also left along with the other hooded figures. Those that were able to follow the direction the bird flew and saw it flying towards the control tower of the airport. Major Lopez was in remorse. He let someone important get caught in front of him. However, it was according to May's will, who volunteered to come with them for the safety of her dogthers. Nevertheless, the Major was still at a loss, similarly with everyone here that witnessed the situation. Aside from one child who was hugged her little sister, while no one was able to hear clearly, she whispered in the air. "Your maj papa, they already took mama." She then felt an invisible pat on her head. "Don't worry," Iola heard as the hand on her head vanished. Day 47 to 1:40 p.m. Highway 2000, Barangay San Juan, Taytay, Rizal. Amidst the long stretch of Highway 2000, In the barangay of San Juan in the first-class municipality of Taytay in the province of Rizal, a huge figure of a lizard could be seen traversing the road with fast speed and loud steps. It was Chaflar, the dragon Mark created. The dragon was running after it used up its regenerated gas inside the gas bag in its body. Although it was very inefficient for it to move around while it regenerated the low-density but highly flammable gas, it needed to continue running in order to catch up. Bam! In the speed that it was running, it could not help that it hit or stomp on the vehicles and infected blocking the road. Of course, the ones riding behind it was already feeling uncomfortable. TSST, 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 that guy really left us alone here. Colleen grumbled as shot the infected chasing behind while minding her aching bottom. Boss really seemed to be in a hurry, Edsel replied while also doing the same. Fortunately, the population of the infected in this area seemed to be not that large and Edsel was able to practice shooting with ease. Of course, the majority of the infected behind was dealt by Colleen as Edsel's shots hitting the infected was still at the lower ratio than the misses. Mew, you two are noisy. Amihan complained as she was doing a bit of sightseeing here. It was the first time she had gone to a place like this with large and tall buildings, lots of cars and highly populated. This barangay was close to the cities of Metro Manila after all and she could see the tall buildings from the distance. Although she grumbled about the two being noisy, that was not the reason that she looked upset. Right now, there was only the three of them atop Chaflar's back. As for Mark, he already ran off after Chaflar ran out of gas for the second time. That had been 6 hours ago. Although Chaflar could run like this, it was way slower than its flying speed. Since time was running out, Mark decided to head off first. With him, he took the blood children, Miracle and Aphelia. Amihan wanted to come with him but since she needed to assist with the air pressure during the flight of Chaflar, she had to stay back. Since then, she was upset while glaring at Colleen and Edsel from time to time. Of course, the two noticed her glares and could only let out troubled expressions. I wonder where that guy is now already. Why did Mark say that we should meet him in NAIA? Aren't we going to Bay City? And just how are we going there? Colleen asked the thing that had been confusing her. Miss, don't ask me. It's the first time I've been out of my province, really. I don't even where that place is or where we are right now. Edsel replied. Actually, he was also interested with the sceneries he had never seen before but the desire to practice overwhelmed that desire. Colleen sighed, a little lost. I just wish we find our way correctly, I only know the general direction. I will complain a lot if he scolded us for getting lost. I also want to sleep. Yawn, me too. Edsel agreed. Since Mark had woken up, they left after they finished preparing. The two managed to get a little nap but it was far from enough. Day 47 to 1:49 p.m. Control Tower, Ninoy Aquino International Airport, Parañaque, Metro Manila. How long will it take? May thought as she tried to endure her nervousness. She knew that nothing would happen to her but the nervousness was creeping onto her heart. Nevertheless, it was instinctual nervousness instead of fear. It was because after the time she was taken by the female hooded figure into the shadow, she could see nothing but darkness. She could not even feel that she was being grasped by someone at all. It was just as if she was just standing there unable to move. The feeling was suffocating. In truth, she was really afraid. If not for the fact that the whisper she heard ensured her of her safety even before the enemies arrived, she would have rather commit suicide than being caught like this. She knew that he should be nearby waiting for the right timing. In any case, she should follow what he said first and follow the plan. Seconds? Minutes? It felt very long. Finally, she felt her body being pulled out and her vision cleared. She saw her body rising up from the floor as if there was a hole on it. When she saw the scene in front of her, she could not help but feel uneasy. There were lines made up of flames forming a strange pattern. 9 hooded figures stood surrounding the lines of flames. 3 bodies of lifeless girls lay inside that pattern. At the center of the pattern, a hole made up of smoke could be seen and inside the hole, it felt like she was staring at a bottomless abyss. It was then the two glowing eyes stared back at her. She could not help but remember the line that said, "If you stare into the abyss is staring back at you." The feeling she had was very surreal. From those eyes, however, she started to feel afraid, the expression in those eyes. It made her remember the terrifying experience she had in the past. "O Great One, we brought the lady." The hooded figures kneeled and lowered their heads to the floor as if they were worshippers worshipping their god. Despite those words, however, the eyes never lay its sight on them as if they were air. The eyes stared at May as if the owner of those stripping her off of her clothes. Who are you and why did you all bring me here?" May asked. She was already afraid and uncomfortable, but she still needed to ask. What she wanted was information. "You should not be afraid, mortal woman. This one had taken a liking to you. As a mere mortal, you should feel honored." An eerie voice echoed in her head. The voice was filled with arrogance and looked down on everything. "Why? I'm just a mortal, you said, and what are you?" May gulped her saliva and asked. Seeing that May asked, the owner of the eyes seemed to be amused. "You don't need to know what I am. You will know in time, since you will spend eternity with this one. As for why this one is interested in you, it is because you have the body of void." May looked confused. Sensing her confusion, the voice proceeded to fill in the information she wanted. It was obvious that the owner of the eyes deemed May as his already and spared no hesitation to tell her about her trait that she never knew she had. The only thing that made her felt better from that information was that she would never be able to conceive if she did not want to. No wonder, when that happened, it was not a safe day after all. That was what made her feel even more devastated that time. She could not help but smile, which dazzled the owner of the eyes. What a dazzling smile from a mortal, a smile befitting the woman that will stand beside this one in the future. It was then that May looked at the eyes straight. She already heard what she wanted to. With a fearless smile, she said, "I'm sorry, but I already have a husband. You should find another woman." The atmosphere inside the control tower froze. Even the hooded figures raised their heads by reflex and stared at May with dumbfounded expressions. "It seems that you failed to assess your current situation. There is no choice available for you but become my woman. Do you think that I will let you leave this place?" The voice became furious and aggressive. It even made the hooded figures feel fear. It was then, "Whether she can leave or not is not for someone like you to decide." A voice not belonging to anyone in this room was heard. All the hooded figures stood up in defense. They failed to notice that even the eyes on the portal were unsettled. It was because even the Great One failed to notice the intruder. As he scattered his blessings around the airport, he was able to see everything outside that was within the scope. Anything that his blessing touched and everything the receivers of the blessing fought, he could detect them. And yet, he failed to detect the owner of the voice even if he was nearby. "Who are you? Show yourself," Umbra shouted as he readied to wave his hands to attack whenever the enemy appeared. On the other hand, the female hooded figure jumped towards May in order to capture her. It was a good move to secure the hostage first. However, it was also a fatal mistake. A strong surge of wind appeared around May, followed by the appearance of black smoke swirling like a small tornado. The female hooded figure was immediately swept into it. As the wind pulled her robe, the female hooded figure's appearance was revealed. Her body was semi-transparent with a black hue similar to mist. The only visible and contrasting trait was her red-colored eyes that had no pupil at all. And then, it was the end of her. Ah! As the black smoke touched her body, she felt an excruciating pain that made her shriek like a banshee. The black smoke slowly swept all over her body, which scraped more and more of her existence. When she finally stopped her wails, her existence was no more leaving the black hooded robe she wore before on the floor. "Shenna!" Umbra yelled. He wanted to charge forward, but with the black smoke surging around, he was not able to. What happened to his subordinate was clear as day. He could only stay on his spot inside the sacrificial circle unless he wanted to commit suicide. The swirling smoke started to shrink. It revealed a man that stood beside May. No, he was not just standing there, His left arm was around May's waist and May was hugging his body. Umbra stared at the man. His visage was hard to guess as he was wearing a strange black mask that seemed to be made of metal. His body was covered with armor of the same style. They could not fathom what kind of existence this man was, but one thing was for sure, he was dangerous. "Who are you to dare lay your hands on the woman this one took interest in?" The Great One's furious voice echoed in everyone's minds. "Oi! Are you deaf? She said that she already have a husband. I guess your pea-sized brain will find it hard to understand." The remaining 8 hooded figures stared at the man with their eyes wide as a golf ball. Who would ever dare try to ridicule the Great One? To dare appear before this one, you are tired of living? The Great One was even more furious, but then, they heard a snicker. "Stop with your delusion. Don't you think that it's the other way around? To lay your hands on my woman, do you think that I will let you all go? Besides, why don't you look me first? Maybe, you will find something the eyes can't see?" Such false intimidation would not war. The Great One glared at the man, noticing the man withdraw the aura masking his existence. He was not able to finish his arrogant sentence. Why you? What in the world are you?" The Great One's eyes had gone wide, and from his voice, he was obviously gawking and was even stuttering from the shock he received. That tone from the Great One made the hooded figures dumbfounded as non-existent sweat droop onto their backs. To make the Great One gawk and stutter like that, what in the world was this man? I will let you bastard go for now, remember that it will not be the last time." The remaining 8 hooded figures became dumbfounded. The Great One was trying to escape. What in the hell's name was this situation? Day 47 to 2:14 p.m., Control Tower, Ninoy Aquino International Airport, Parañaque, Metro Manila. The temperature inside the room became cold, not in a literal meaning but more in everyone's emotional aspect. Especially for the hooded figures, they felt as if their world had turned around. None of them would ever think or even dared to have negative thoughts about the most respected Great One. Although the Great One was not omnipotent in their eyes, in the least he had the dignity and pride as someone who stood over mortals. It was way beyond their beliefs to see the Great One behave like this. The feeling was like they had been betrayed by their creator. Mark, on the other hand, felt amused as to how the scene unfolded. Even he did not expect the leader of the enemy to suddenly lose all his composure. However, if he think about it, it was no wonder. This was not the first time he heard that question. Even the formless demon he encountered 2 days ago asked the same thing. The answer, however, he was not sure himself, especially with his current circumstances. One thing for sure, he already strayed away from being human. With those thoughts in mind, Mark spoke with a smile hidden behind his mask. Although that smile could not be seen, the ridicule in his voice was obvious. "Say, you want to retreat. How are going to do that?" This time, even the Great One froze. It was as what Mark had expected. Any kind of ritual to call another being from another plane had an opening and closing rites. Like a session of Spirit of the Glass, the opening and closing prayers were required. Not fulfilling those requirements would lead to peril. A ritual binds the soul of the people doing the ritual and the being they called into the ritual itself. In the case of calling the spirits, the spirit would not be able to go back to the spirit world, while the people that called that spirit would be bound to the spirit, causing a curse. It caused the haunting events on those people after they failed to close up the ritual. It was the same with this ritual that was used to beg for blessings from the Great One. An opening and closing rite was required from both sides. Unlike the opening rites, which required a lot of things in preparation, the closing rites only had a single requirement. All it needed was that all the participants of the opening rites to be present, with the exception of the sacrifices. Mark made it that the closing rites were impossible to be performed. "You bastard!" the Great One bellowed as he channeled his energy through the portal to attack Mark in full rage. Thick black clouds surged out of the portal towards Mark. That amount of energy was too large that even the sturdy control tower started to creak and shake. The hooded figures hurriedly retreated. This scale of attack was not something that they could endure. They should at least step out of the control tower and wait it out. In their own ways, the hooded figures tried to escape. However, that was when they realized. Gahhhh. One of the hooded figures that tried to blend into the shadows cried out in pain. He was forced to stop sinking down into the shadow on the floor and fell down. There was no way for him to stand up anymore, as from his semi-transparent knee to his feet was already missing. Stalker morphed into a large bird and tried to fly out of the broken window. Before he was able to, however, black smoke surged from outside the control tower, blocking the window. Thinking that it was only smoke, he charged out through the wall of smoke. Graaaaah. His raspy voice was heard as he fell off the several meters high building. There was no way for him to either fly or even morph back into human form. What he thought as nothing but black smoke clung onto his body and started to contaminate his flesh. With a loud splat, his body laid on the airport grounds with his bones broken. He could not even move as the black smoke started to eat his body. Slowly, his cries alerted the remaining infected in the airport. His wails of pain turned into wails of despair as the infected started to feast on his flesh. The infected were unlucky, however. They soon followed Stalker's steps and became black, rotting, corroded flesh on the floor due to the contamination of miasma. Inside the tower, the remaining hooded figures knew that they would not be able to escape this. If the Great One showed fear on the man in front of them, then it would be even more impossible for them to be able to defeat him. The spiritual energy the Great One released towards Mark poured in like a dam with its gates broken. However, the latter was facing the surge of energy with just his right arm. Ping! 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 The spiritual energy was very thick that several crystals appeared in front of Mark in just a few seconds. Yes, he was using the Great One as a power source to gather more crystals. It was one thing he noticed when he arrived. The energy the enemy was using, although looked similar to miasma, was actually pure spiritual energy. It was out of his expectations, but he thought of taking advantage of it. 10 crystals were immediately created before the Great One incredulously looked at Mark and May, who were unharmed. Done. My turn. Mark did not wait for any reply and shot his own surge of black smoke towards the portal. Gruua. Everyone held their heads as they heard the scream. Since the voice of the Great One was transmitted directly to their heads, the Great One screaming made everyone feel that their heads were being hammered. Then, puff, puff, one by one, the remaining hooded figures plopped onto the floor. Ones with ethereal bodies just looked severely weakened, but the only one with physical body, the werewolf, vomited a large amount of blood. Darn, he escaped. Mark spoke, seeing that the flames on the magic circle started to dim and the smoke around the portal started to scatter. But Mark was not that bothered with it. He already expected that the most he could do to the guy was to damage his spiritual body severely. The portal was only made for communication, and the most it could do was transfer energies both ways. If the enemy forcefully closed the portal, he would not be able to stop him. Of course, forcefully closing the portal would severely injure the Great One. After all, as a devil, his body was made up of energies rather than an actual physical body. Pretty much like other spirits and elemental beings. Mayor, are you okay? Mark asked as he rubbed his temple. That scream was way more effective than the energy attack the enemy released before. HMM, I'm fine. Just a little dizzy. May replied with a sheepish smile. Sorry, I have to make you experience this, it's fine. Mark caressed May's head. He was almost late to arrive actually. In the right timeline, May rejected the invitation, forcing the battle between the survivors, the military and the enemies. In order to escape, the others tried to hold back the enemies, but they all ended up being slaughtered. After all, there was no way for them to fight beings that were far from humans. Before they were able to escape, the 2 hooded figures that remained hidden pierced the wheels of the vehicle. Without any other choice, the skirmish at the flyover continued. The large bird managed to take away May by force and flew her away. However, she struggled too hard that she ended up falling onto the sea of infected below. Due to the failure of May's abduction, the Great One was furious. He ordered the slaughter of everyone that participated in this mission. It included his friends and daughters. After the ritual was concluded, every single one of the hooded figures became cursed and died even before they were able to leave the control tower. Now, however, May was alive in his arms. Mark arrived just when the enemies that planned to abduct May went out of the control tower. Without any time to prepare, he approached the flyover while concealing himself using both the miasma and the photokinesis mental crystal. Of course, despite that concealment, May and Iola still detected him. Iola was understandable, but May was still a mystery. He told her the plan and made her go with the enemy. It was to know the reason why they tried to abduct her and why did the enemy revealed too much rage on the supposed failure. Although the reason was surprising, Mark really did not care about it. May was May even if she did not have the body of void. Still, it was a good thing because of his condition now. After he blocked all the possible exits with miasma that was hard to see due to the thick black clouds outside and the information they wanted was revealed, that was when he entered. Gerger, what are you going to do with them? May asked while looking at the enemies suffering on the floor. Isn't it obvious? They have no worth, so I'll kill them. Well, except one, I guess. Mark said as he made a surge of miasma envelop 6 of the 7 enemies left. There was really no use of them in Mark's eyes. Unlike mutators, their abilities came from their birth and those abilities were also not psychic ones. He could not gain anything from them. Information. It would be impossible for them to speak. They would surely kill themselves first. It's also possible that they did not know anything at all as lackeys. In any case, they should die just because they laid their hands on May, even if they were just following orders. Their horrified and painful screams ensued. The 2 ghostly figures vanished into thin air while the shadow people scattered like smoke. As for the werewolf, he turned into charred rotten pile of flesh and bones. Umbra was left horrified and shaking. This was the very first time he felt fear. He saw what happened to his subordinates. This was not just a work of any mortal. He could not understand. Why did a mortal like this man in front of him able to wield miasma? It was nonsensical. Umbra, who was weakened from the backlash of the ritual, stared at Mark and May. It was then. Boom. 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 Mark and May looked out of the window and saw balls of red light falling from the sky from several directions. Flares. Mark asked. It should be the signal for retreat. May replied. Well, it's more reasonable for them to retreat. The portal is already gone, but the sky is still covered with thick clouds and below are infected that don't die even if you cut off their heads. Odal should be hysterical now. Haha. It won't be believable if she's calm after all. We'll just apologize to her later. It's just I can't reveal myself to the military yet. Why? Because it won't be fun if the enemies know that bad karma is approaching them. Mark then turned to Umbra. We need to make that senator feel that he won, so Mayor, you need to hide with me. That guy there will be our messenger. Won't he try to betray us? No, I still have a method. Also, that devil won't let him go because of the failure, so he doesn't have anywhere else to go but escape. Mark then approached Umbra and sat in front of him. You know what you should do, right? Umbra raised his head and looked at Mark, who started to reach to his face. Without warning, Mark made him swallow a ball of miasma as his non-existent face warped in despair. Now, he had no choice but follow the instructions he was given. Day 47 to 2:28 p.m. Control Tower, Ninoy Aquino International Airport, Parañaque, Metro Manila. Leaving Umbra to his miserable thoughts, Mark and May looked outside the control tower. It might be just about 2 hours and a half past noon, but the wind that was blowing was rather cold. Mutagen had caused a drastic change in the world. The change was not only on the creatures but the overall state of Earth. Back before the outbreak, it was already kind to say that the air in Manila was bad. In fact, the pollution was too bad that when viewing the sky above Manila from outside its boundaries, it always looked like it was about to rain due to the gray-colored clouds. The air before was too dry and hot and always with thick dust and smelled like smoke and gasoline. Now, not only that it was cold but was rather refreshing. Of course, it would still depend on the location. In some parts of Manila, there were still fires that were still emitting smoke, and for sure, the air below would smell bad due to the number of infected around. While feeling the cold wind, Mark looked towards the direction where the flyover defended by the main forces of military was located. Of course, by the distance, there was no way for him to see what was currently happening there. "Gerger, are you worried about Gale and Iola?" May asked. "A little, but they should be fine. The military decided to retreat early. If not, then I will really be worried," Mark replied while caressing May's hair. It felt like a very long time. He thought as he felt the comfortable sensation on his arms. The sounds of gunfire echoed with the distance as the forces from Bay City that participated in the mission prepared to depart. Mark would have been worried about his daughters and Odalina if the retreat was a bit later. He knew the plot where the enemies lured a lot of infected along the way to make them waste ammunition and resources. If they did not retreat now, the likelihood of being stuck within the horde due to lack of ammunition and other resources would be very high. Fortunately, it seemed that the military noticed the problem and decided to pull out early. In any case, they already failed this mission from the start, so it was more rational to retreat as soon as possible. In Mark's view, even though they were careful, the military still underestimated the infected in this airport. Even if the enemies did not try to hinder them, it was still very unlikely for them to succeed. The only thing that the enemies did was just to ensure that they would have no way to escape and everyone would get annihilated. Another thing, Mark left a bodyguard to guard his daughters. If this was 3 days ago, the little guy would not be able to guard them, but now, he was the best one to do it. Now, to think of it, it was both fortune and misfortune, my encounter with that demon in that forest. Mark turned to May. She seemed to have something in mind. "Mayor, what's wrong?" "Gerger, I'm just thinking. Why did that creature inside that portal ask what Gerger is?" "Haha, I don't really know myself." Mark took off his mask. It felt suffocating. "Let's see, how should I say it?" Mark tapped his chin. "It's like this, my mind and consciousness is connected to emotions of others. My soul is a fusion of different entities and creatures. My eyes can see the past and the future while my thought can open up space. My blood is the result of mutagen while my right wrist is the embodiment of psi pathogen. Aside from that, my body contains miasma and my genes are fused with a demon's." Mark then looked at May's eyes. "What do you think? I don't understand everything you said, but it sounds confusing and chaotic." "That's right. I don't even know what to call myself now. Actually, everyone started to stray away from being human after mutagen invaded Earth. It's just that my body and actions kind of overdid it." Mark smiled bitterly. "But," May smiled brightly, "Gerger is still Gerger, right?" For the first time, Mark stared at May as if he was hypnotized. That smile surely captivated him, and those words really hit him home run. Although he was a loner and preferred less contact with people as much as possible, the thought of people unable to accept what you were was still unnerving. Even demons and devils were confused and afraid to what kind of being he was now. He would be hurt of May and the others were not able to accept him. However, it was an unnecessary thought. He felt kind of ashamed now. While in deep thought, a tight hug pulled him back to reality. "I missed you," May whispered in his ear. Both the genuine sentiment and the feeling of her breath were ticklish. Hearing that, Mark returned the hug and replied, "I missed you too." A pink atmosphere started to form inside the control tower surrounded by the infected. That was when, "Your Majesty, please mind the time and place." A cute but stern voice interrupted them. In surprise, both Mark and May stepped away from each other. Being interrupted, the emotions inside Mark's mind were swept away and he became calm once more. On the other hand, May was totally blushing and confused. May looked forward and saw a creature she never knew that really existed. "Ephelia, is the scouting done?" Mark asked the little creature. In front of Mark was another sylph similar to a Mihan floating with her semi-transparent wings. Behind the sylph was Miracle, who was staring at May quietly. "Yes, Your Majesty." I also brought the princess since she was looking for you. But seriously, your majesty, why did you not call us if the thing's already settled? The sylph started to reprimand Mark, who left Miracle outside the control tower. Although he left her in a room and was safe, the royal maid who was overprotective of the princess was angry. Not only that, the couple started flirting while a stranger was watching and there were dead bodies inside the room. Alright, my bad. Mark scratched his head. Miracle, come here. Father. Miracle approached steadily, but her eyes did not leave May even for a second. On the other hand, Ephelia was also scrutinizing May, albeit stealthily. Right now, Ephelia and Miracle had been separated from each other. Since Ephelia was a soul, she just lacked a soulless but functioning body. That was why the body of the guardian of the altar where the deity of bloodshed was sealed came in handy. That was right. Ephelia was now using the body of the sylph that lost her soul due to the possession of the demon. With the help of the Psi crystal in Mark's wrist, taking Ephelia out of Miracle's body and putting her soul inside the sylph was easy. However, Ephelia was still adjusting to her new body. After all, although the size of the soul and container did not matter, the body of the sylph functioned differently than that of a human. Another thing was that due to miasma, the body lost most of its capability to control wind, and Ephelia could not use it aside from flying, which she practiced for hours with Mark's and Amihan's help. Even now, she could not control the wings freely. That was why she had another mode of transport which was left outside. Gurgur. They are. May's bashfulness was washed away, but the current scene. Even Umbra, who was weakly watching by the side, was dumbfounded seeing a high-status spiritual being standing before an embodiment of miasma. Before Mark could say anything, Ephelia spoke. Pleased to meet you, Her Majesty. Ephelia gave a curtsy towards May. This one is called Ephelia Myfriel, the personal maid of the previous king of Arielis, who was now serving under His Majesty. May was thoroughly confused now. Ephelia, can you do a normal greeting? Mark sighed before he turned to May. Mayor, as she said, that sylph is Ephelia. This one here is Miracle. Just don't think of that His Majesty and Her Majesty stuff. That's just how Ephelia is. Mark pointed at Miracle, who was currently hiding behind his legs while steadily peeking at May. Gurgur picked up another one. May asked while trying to beckon Miracle to approach her. It's not like I wanted to. It just happened. Mark sighed and tried to push Miracle forward towards May. He was not lying. He never expected Miracle to call him father. It just happened and he accepted, since there was really no demerit for him to have such a powerful daughter beside him. He then lowered his body and spoke to the little girl. Miracle, she's your new mother. Mother. Miracle voiced while looking at May. May tried to approach the little girl, but to her dismay, Miracle ran back and hid behind Mark once more. Ha ha ha. Let's just take it slowly. Mark felt happy seeing May's distraught face. It seemed that she did not mind Mark introducing another daughter to her. Mark patted May's and Miracle's heads before turning to Ephelia, this time, with a serious look. How did it go? Mark asked. Your Majesty, I tried to control the infected mutated by the spiritual energy, but they are harder to control than the others. It is more efficient to just have the normal ones. I see. Mark nodded. When he set up the net for the enemies, he sent Ephelia and Miracle to do several things. One was to try to control the immortal infected, and the other was to scout the perimeter of the airport, especially the area where the nest was. As for their transport, they had a human-sized infected eagle that they encountered on the way. The infected's body was in good condition, which prompted them control it and use it as transport of Ephelia and Miracle. Currently, the infected eagle was outside waiting for Ephelia's next orders. How about the large infected in the airfield? Can you control it? I think I can, Your Majesty. I actually wanted to try earlier, but Ephelia's voice was filled with uncertainty. But what? The large pod at the center of the nest is baffling me. It felt like there is an infected inside, but at the same time, it was not an infected either. It's really strange. That is why we did not dare approach carelessly. I see. Good work, Mark said with a frown. From the information Mark had gathered from the military and from Colleen and Alana, infected nests were a total mystery for the most part. Infected nests were different from most people thought of. It was natural to think that infected nests were formed after a large number of infected was gathered in a certain area, but it was actually the opposite. The way and reason infected nests form was still a mystery, but because of the nest forming, the infected around the area was attracted to the place where the nest was. As for Mark, however, he had a vague theory. The nests were places where the highest concentrations of mutagen were located and the infected were being drawn to it. Those infected that were lucky would mutate to stronger kinds, and that was why anyone would encounter stronger infected as they closed into the nest. In this nest, however, it seemed that something other than the infected would be born in the near future. Say, Ephelia, how long do you think before that pod hatch? I can't say, but I have the feeling that it should be today or in the latest, tomorrow morning. Good, we still have things to do here while waiting for Chaflar to arrive. We can also wait for that pod to hatch. If we can take what is inside, we'll take it. If not, we'll destroy it. Mark smiled. He could not help but feel the desire to collect more strange creatures as pets. He then turned to Umbra. I'll tell you what you need to do and you can go. Be aware that I'm watching you using that miasma inside your body. Do something undesirable and you will know what will happen. Mark said with a sinister smile which made Umbra drenched in non-existent sweat. Instructions were filled into the mind of the shadow person and he scurried away from the control tower. Starting with Umbra, Mark's plan to raise the status of the senator inside the Bay City started. Day 47 to 5:11 p.m. Rooftop, Terminal 2, Ninoy Aquino International Airport, Parañaque, Metro Manila. On the rooftop of the NAIA Terminal 2, Mark and May sat together with Miracle, Ephelia and the Blood Children, with the exception of Crimson who was not here. While waiting for the others that were still not here to arrive, Mark and May, who were separated for a long time, started to tell the stories they experienced during their separation. Learning about the Blood Children, Ephelia and Freed's connection and about Freed's existence, May could not help but feel both shock and sympathy. Their stories sounded like fantasy, but with what was happening in the whole world right now and also experiencing many things, she could only believe it, especially since there were living evidences in front of her. Right now, she was playing with Oracle while talking to Mark. Unlike Miracle, who looked shy, the Blood Children were as usual who were curious about almost everything. When they all saw May after getting of their canisters, the first thing that they did was surround May in curiosity. If Mark did not inform her beforehand, she would surely think that she was being besieged or something along that line. While they were talking, Mark could not help but bring out a pressing issue that was bothering him. It was about why Laylaps and Fine seemed to be not with them despite the fact that those two could help a lot in this mission. The reason was both bothering and surprising. Laylaps was injured in their previous mission apparently. They were gathering supplies from warehouses at the Pier 15 about 3 kilometers north of Bay City. While on the mission, however, Laylaps accidentally stepped on a trap which wounded her left hind foot. It turned out that one of the warehouses seemed to be inhabited by survivors but left the area in hurry, leaving the traps in the open. It was just unlucky that the Golden Dog activated one of the traps that had yet to be triggered. As for Fine, the beetle was sick. Though, being sick was just the normal way to describe it, the real circumstances were stranger. The beetle seemed to be in a very slow and painful process of molting. In fact, its old exoskeleton already started to crack, revealing brand new exoskeleton inside just the previous night. Mark did not think that beetles of Fane's species molt after adulthood, but it did not really matter. The world had already become a strange place. It would not be surprising if even people started to molt their skin like snakes. While talking, Mark and May ate food and watched the infected nest in front of them. Other people might find it repulsive to eat while something as disgusting looking as the current state of the airfield, but the two did not bother at all. They were even eating happily. The food Mark got from the airport terminal was still in good condition. Since the airport was untouched by survivors since the start of the outbreak, the properly stored food Mark saw inside the terminal was quite an amount. It seemed that the airport stocked properly before the outbreak since it was the holiday season when it started. Gerger, what are you thinking about? May asked as she noticed him staring at the huge pod being guarded by the Alpha type. Well, I just noticed the resemblance of that pod. Right, Ephelia. Yes, Ephelia nodded. I may hate to admit it, but that pod closely resembles the pods that we encountered back in our planet. It is also one of the reasons I feel unsettled around that pod. Mark looked at the largest pod with stern eyes. From the memories he inherited from Freed, that pod really looked like the ones that they encountered in Arielis. From those pods, powerful psychic infected were born. The existence of this pod further bolstered the idea that mutagen and psi pathogen could have come from a single source. Tink. A sharp sound was heard as a new mental crystal was formed. While doing other things, Mark also chose this place to pass time to take advantage of the spiritual energy from the black clouds that were yet to scatter. Looking at how thick the clouds even after several hours, it were likely that these thick clouds would stay for a few more hours. Still, the creation of the new crystals was not as fast as when he was inside the storm created by the berserk whale. The concentration of the clouds was too scattered and most of the energy were directed to the infected, causing a lot of them to mutate. Fortunately, the infected already stopped mutating after the ritual was stopped. Otherwise, it would be terrifying to encounter a horde of millions of immortal infected. Of course, the number of those that already mutated was still in thousands. Most people that would encounter these infected would surely die without doubt. A few more minutes passed. Mark turned his head towards the northeast. Finally, they were too slow. Mark sighed. May also turned her head. Due to the black clouds, she could not see it immediately. She then zoomed in her sight and she finally saw the shadow under the dark clouds flying towards their direction. Soon, the large creature landed in front of them. Even though Mark had already told her about this, May was still amazed. In her eyes, Shaflar looked strong and intimidating. Of course, she noticed that it looked strange when it was looking at Mark. Then, a small figure flew towards Mark which he caught with care. Emihan, I already warned you about diving towards me like that. Mark could not help but reprimand the little sylph. It was always like this, and if he did not carefully catch her, she would surely hurt herself. Boo, my lord left me with them. Colleen is really bad at directions, we got lost. Emihan complained teary-eyed. Mark looked at Colleen, who looked embarrassed as she hopped down from Chaffler's back. Sorry, Colleen apologized. At least, she did not try to glaze her wrongdoing. On the other hand, Edsel seemed to be tired mentally. Why did you all arrive too late? What happened? Mark asked sternly. Well, Colleen smiled bitterly. We encountered a horde of infected along the way. They were all mutated, so we tried to run away, but they chased us. Oh, Shaflar flew us away, but those infected were too persistent. They jumped and climbed up buildings just to chase us. Then, we got lost. Mark sighed. You all could have just followed those thick black clouds, you know that? Hello. What Mark said seemed to have struck a nerve on Colleen. Who in the right mind will charge forward such sinister-looking clouds? It is where the NAIA is though. Colleen was at a loss. Although Mark was right, she knew that she was not wrong either. Following common sense, it was better to avoid things that looked too dangerous or strange, and these thick black clouds were far more than just sinister-looking. All right, I'll let it go this time. Mark decided to let Colleen off this time. Of course, next time, she would receive a good scolding. After that, Mark was about to introduce May to Colleen and Edsel. That was when. No need to introduce me, we knew each other, huh? Mark was quite surprised about it. He never heard anything about this. Surprised? Colleen acted as if she succeeded in her prank. At that moment, Mark turned to May. You know her? But then, no. It was Colleen's turn to be dumbfounded. Wait. We met before at one of your father's parties. I was together with my father and your cousin at that time. Cousin? Who? Joish. Ah, that. May seemed to have remembered, but her expression became even more disturbed and sad. What kind of party is that? Mark asked. He could sense that it brought out a bad memory on May. Ah, Colleen also realized her blunder and her voice trailed off. I guess, I know now why she doesn't remember me. She really looked down in that party and seemed to be out of it. It was her engagement party with, well, I don't really remember the guy. Mark sighed. No wonder May looked down. Still, it was a small world. That's the past, all right. Mark caressed May's head, making her nod. While consoling May, Mark introduced Edsel as his subordinate. Edsel, however, turned really timid in front of May. It was kind of understandable, though. He was also the same when he saw Colleen and Alana in person for the first time. Say, what are we going to do here? Colleen asked. She was rather feeling uncomfortable while looking at the pulsating pods below. Especially the largest one. Her scalp was tingling and she was feeling shivers in her spine whenever her eyes fell on that horrendous thing. Not only Colleen, even Edsel looked uncomfortable. Well, stay here for the night. Huh? Why? Bay City is already close by. I have my plans. We'll go there after my business here is done, all right? Okay. But where are we going to sleep? Colleen was rather jittery right now and her eyes were kind of red. It seemed that the lack of sleep these past days was already getting onto her. Even Edsel was showing signs of fatigue. Maybe we can try the VIP lounge. Mark suggested. Eat first and we'll look for it. Mark tossed some canned food to the two. It was also obvious that they had not eaten lunch yet. Day 47 to 5:30 p.m. Government officials' residences, Central Business Park, Bay City, Parañaque, Metro Manila. Yes, sir, I'm here to report. Umbra kneeled in front of Devon. At the side, Senator Estrada was watching. How did it go? Where are the others? Devon asked with a stern expression as usual. Sir, there had been a change of plans and the target was kept alive. My subordinates are together with the target. What happened? Why is she still alive? Senator Estrada could not help but stand from his seat hearing that the person he wanted dead was still alive. On contrary, there was no change in Devon's expression. Speak. What happened? The Great One took interest in the lady and we invited her under the Great One's orders. My subordinates were currently guarding her and we were preparing to escort her away. As that so, Devon was hit with realization. The business and plans the members of the organization could not be altered in any way with one circumstance as exception. It was when the Great One or the other beings with the same authority willed for the change. All right. Be sure to properly escort her. What about the military and the woman's companions? Sir, the lady agreed to the invitation without resistance and the Great One decided to spare them by the lady's request. However, they failed the mission with a large amount of casualties. They might return sooner or later. Hearing that, Devon nodded with understanding. It was probably done on a whim of the Great One. It was not the first time that it happened. All right, you can go. Be sure not to displease the Great One. Yes, sir. Getting the permission to leave, Umbra melded within the shadows and vanished. Devon seemed to accept the report since it was not the first time that it happened, but of course, Senator Estrada was totally displeased. Devon, what is the meaning of this? How dare that Great One destroy my plans? Hearing that, Senator Estrada was not able to speak further as his neck was grabbed by Devon. Be careful about your words. The name of the Almighty Great One is not for someone like you to defame. Feeling the killing intent in Devon's words, Senator Estrada gulped his saliva and nodded. Devon finally let him go. Just be happy that the military failed and had a large amount of casualties. Use this to weaken their prestige. As for the companions of that woman, they were nothing without her. It will be fine to let them go for now. Devon walked out of the room, leaving the pale-faced senator. The senator was fuming inside, but of course, he would not show it unless he wanted to die. Huh. I should hide from everyone now, Umbra said while looking at the walls erected around Bay City. Since he had no place to go now and he fulfilled the task given to him, he should lay low. Then. Gaha. His scream was heard as the miasma inside him started to eat him from inside. Why? Then, who knows if he was just hallucinating, but he heard that person's voice from the miasma swirling inside him. Don't be mistaken, I never said that I will leave you alive. Like your subordinates, you will die just because you tried to lay your hand on my woman. Still, you have my gratitude for following my instructions. Goodbye. In a few moments, Umbra vanished without a trace, leaving his robe being blown by the wind to Manila Bay. Day 48 to 5:40 a.m. Mabuhay Lounge, NAIA Terminal 2, Pasay City, Metro Manila. It was early in the morning and the sky had already started to brighten. The thick black clouds yesterday already thinned out, although there was still some small clump of black clouds above the control tower, which was the center of the entire event that happened yesterday. After the remaining members of his current group arrived, Mark led them to search for a good place to rest. Unfortunately, Mark neglected the fact that there would be no private or VIP lounges in the Terminal 2. All they found suitable to rest at was the domestic lounge of Mabuhay Lounge. There should be other lounges that looked like hotels in other terminals, but Mark decided not to leave Terminal 2, which was the closest to the infected nest. With the more than whole month of neglect and the infected roaming the place, it was dirty and smelled bad. After they cleared up the remaining infected inside and secured the place, they cleaned up a small area of the lounge near where the windows were located. Since they found the place near sunset and because of the black clouds outside, the place was rather dark. Alaula became very handy as they cleaned the area where they would rest. Amidst their cleaning, Mark felt that the miasma he left in that shadow man's body had activated. Mark was sure that that man received his intent within the miasma before he was consumed by it. That person only got his just desserts. It was quite disappointing though that he was not able to take that guy's robe. When they left the control tower, Mark also took the robes left on the ground and managed to inspect the robes after cleaning their resting area. To his amazement, the robes were not normal at all and did not seem to be made of just normal cloth. It was very sturdy, and even stabbing the cloth with a normal knife he got from the catering area of the lounge did not damage it in the slightest. Shadow people, spectral people, a werewolf and a tic-tac that was under the leadership of a devil. Now, this unusual robe. Mark could not help but think that the organization that they belonged to was deeply rooted not only on the surface of the earth but also on its hidden side that could not be touched by normal people. The whole night was rather an uneventful one. Colleen and Edsel immediately fell asleep after they ate dinner. The two lay down on different sofas, not even minding the bad smell that seeped into foam of the sofas. That was how tired the two was. Mark did not mind them and decided to be on the lookout. May and Miracle, along with the other blood children, slept around him after they lined up several sofas on different directions, forming a large bed. Mark sat on one end of the sofa while May used his lap as pillow. She really seemed to be happy about it, that she was smiling while she slept. There was also the peaceful expression on her face that was pleasing to look at. Amihan and Aphelia were sleeping on the table with folded blanket as bed. The faces of the two looked sort of identical with only a few differences. According to Amihan, it was the natural trait of sylphs to have slightly identical faces. She even said that she looked exactly like her mother. However, even Amihan did not know what was the reason behind it. Miracle and the blood children wanted to accompany him for the whole night, but he made them all sleep, although they did not really need it by context. Furthermore, rather than being asleep, it was more of shutting down their senses and body functions to conserve energy. Mark already had a good understanding about the blood children's bodies. It came from both his observations and the research done by Alana's uncle, Professor Suzuki, the head scientist in the Eastern Military Settlement. The bodies of the blood children were really similar to human blood by structure. The thing that differed, however, was the cells that made up their bodies. It could be said that the majority of their bodies were composed cells that could multiply and combine at will with the command of the cells that served as their nervous system. Furthermore, their bodies were continuously functions without ceasing unless they perished. In a sense, their bodies were shapeless human heart that would not rest. Due to that, it would consume energy which they could replenish by consuming blood of other creatures. By shutting down their body functions, however, which led to a pseudo-sleep state, they were able to lessen the energy consumption of their bodies. Yawn. Mark stretched his body and decided to move his body around. He gently lifted May's head from his lap and placed it down on a pillow covered with folded blanket to lessen the smell. He then sneaked out, trying not to wake up everyone. He then picked up the mental crystals that were created overnight and fell on the sofa beside him and stored them inside the psi crystal. Mark felt that it would be more convenient if the crystals could be created and stored at the same time, but it seemed to not work at all. Every time a new crystal was created, whether it was mental crystal or physical crystal, it would pop and he needed to store it manually. Using the window nearby, which was already broken and was currently covered with a blanket, he slipped out of the lounge and made his way to the roof of the terminal. Chaflar seemed to notice its master and raised its head. The dragon was left on the roof together with the infected eagle that was not moving like a statue. Mark signaled the dragon to continue sleeping as he only came out to check the situation in the airfield. When Mark saw the current situation, he scratched his head. "It seems I'm not the only one waiting for the pod to hatch," he murmured. On the airfield, countless infected were wandering. It seemed that all the infected that went out yesterday after being lured by the military already returned. Among them were the skinless infected that would not die no matter what. Their bodies were prominent among the horde since they were the only ones with a pinkish flesh color. The strange thing, however, was not only the Alpha was around the pod, there were several strange-looking infected that he never saw before. An eye-catching one was a more than 2-meter infected that seemed to have metallic parts on its body. Its dark silver-colored body was really noticeable even from afar. Mark sat down at the edge of the roof watching the scene below. Soon, the sun started to rise and Mark could feel the temperature of the air started to become warmer. Another hour passed. Grrrwww. Gray. Suddenly, the infected started to become agitated. All of them started growling. Hearing millions of infected growling at the same time could make anyone shiver. Pop. 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 Mark started to hear popping and bursting sounds. The sounds came from the smaller pods that started to hatch. One by one, different kinds of mutated infected came out from the pods. All of them seemed to be at level 2 mutation or even higher. Then, a strange sight unfolded. The infected near the already hatched pods started to swarm over the remains of the pods, and then they started eating the remains. Mark was confused at the sudden sight, but he decided to leave for a bit. The roars of the infected woke up everyone inside the lounge and he needed to get them out first to see the situation. As they got back to the rooftop, Mark told them what was happening. Due to the scare they had after hearing the roars, none of them were half asleep and were paying through attention to what Mark was telling them. When they arrived at the rooftop, "Your Majesty, it seems that the large pod is about to hatch." "We're on time for the main event then," Mark said with great interest. It did not take long and the about 4-meter or higher pod started to shake. The boils on the surface of the pod started to burst, scattering green liquid onto the surroundings. That was the time when the blood children started shivering. Even Miracle was not an exception. They were shivering from fear. Not only the children but all of them were overwhelmed by a sudden pressure. It was a heavy pressure telling them of dangerous thing that was about to come out. On the other hand, the strong-looking infected outside the pod, even the Alpha, started to behave wildly. In everyone's surprise, they started to attack the pod that was about to hatch. What in the world are they doing? Mark also found it odd. It was then when, several large hands burst out of the pod and grabbed the heads of the smaller mutated infected around the pod. The heads of the infected were crushed, which made a number of bodies fall down around the pod. Ruar. Seeing his subordinates being killed effortlessly, the Alpha roared loudly. It grabbed a small luggage vehicle nearby and threw it to the pod mercilessly. A part of the pod was crushed open and a large hole was created. However, it could be seen that the vehicle did not manage to kill what was inside. The vehicle throne was grabbed by numerous hands and was immediately thrown back out. Burst. Finally, the pod burst open and a large shadow jumped out in the open. Everyone was dumbfounded. What in the world? Colleen voiced out speechlessly. Bam! Bam! The shadow charged forward the Alpha. Well, I'm not interested in that anymore. Mark scratched his head. The thing that came out of the pod was a 3-meter half-humanoid. It was half-humanoid because only its upper body was shaped like a human and it was obvious that it was a female. Its lower body, however. There were a large number of tentacles that looked like arms without bones, and at the end of each tentacle was a large hand that was more than large enough to grab a human's torso. The creature looked like a meroctopus with hand tentacles instead of octopus tentacles. But something made Mark and Ophelia unsettled. Each of the palms of the hands at the end of the tentacles had eyes. Furthermore, the face of the creature itself had about a dozen eyes. Your Majesty, isn't that? I know. Mark frowned. With the difference of the humanoid body, the appearance of the tentacles with eyes was highly identical to a creature Mark did not want to encounter at all. God. That was the name they gave it. The mountain-sized creature that caused the destruction of Arielis. This monster they were watching gave the same vibe as that creature. We need to kill it, Mark said with all seriousness. Gerger, Mark, boss, are you sure about this? The three people with Mark voiced their hesitation. That creature was surely not something they could take down even if there was a dozen of them. I'm going alone, don't worry. I can also take advantage that its attention is on the Alpha. Gerger, before that, May suddenly interrupted Mark. What is it? Mark turned to her and noticed that her eyes were dilated. She was using her ability while staring at the pod that the creature had just left. Gerger, there's a large stone inside the pod. Everyone turned toward the pod. Of course, Colleen and Edsel were not able to see it. Mark on the other hand strained his eyes for a bit and managed to catch a glimpse of it. Without saying anything to them, Mark turned into a puff of black mist. The mist then could be seen making its beeline towards the pod that was now being besieged by the infected. Day 48 to 7:08 a.m. Airfield, Ninoy Aquino International Airport, Pasay City, Metro Manila. Bam! Boom! Crash! Loud sounds echoed inside the airport as the multitudes of mutated infected tried to besiege the strange creature that came out of the largest pod. Inside his subspace, Mark saw everything from above. He found it strange that something like this hatched out from the pod and the infected outside started to behave strangely after it came out. Since yesterday, he saw the Alpha guarding the pod for some reason. The other infected did not have interest in the large pod or even the other pods here, as if it was natural that the pods existed here. However, it became strange when the new pods hatched. From the stories he heard from May, they had seen an infected nest before, and there were also pods in that nest that could give birth to strong mutated infected. However, she never mentioned about the infected trying to eat the remains of the pods. Another thing, if the Alpha and the other infected here wanted something from that strange creature, they would not have waited till the time it hatched and destroyed the pod from the beginning. A realization came into Mark's mind. A change happened overnight when we are resting. And the only thing that could have caused the change was the clouds made up of spiritual energy that the Great One released yesterday. The infected were attracted to psychic energy and the like. He knew about it long ago. It just meant that these pods were affected heavily by the spiritual energy of the Great One. The smaller pods were still fine, but the largest pod that could have been the most affected among the pods changed the being inside it differently. Although it might just be an assumption, that thing is similar to the infected in Arielis. Mark muttered. That thing surely had both qualities of an infected with high-level mutation like the Alpha, but the physical characteristic of the God. Of course, it was not also the same as those psychic infected in Arielis. If it was, Ophelia would have detected it. In a sense, this thing was an entirely different species. While the fight between the infected was ongoing, Mark dived straight towards the remains of the largest pod. He was aiming for that stone lying at the center of the remains. Now that Mark was closer, he could see how large the stone was. If it was just fist size or even smaller, May would not noticed it, but it was as large as an average-sized human's torso. Seeing this large stone together with that strange infected coming from a single pod was strange. The other pods did not have anything like this. Furthermore, the infected did not seem to have any interest on the stone, as the infected that besieged the remains of the pod started to feast on the remains without even trying to approach the stone. Mid-air, Mark appeared and disappeared one last time before appearing beside the stone. As he was closer, he could now see the stone clearly. Its surface was really like a rock. The stone was shaped in a perfect sphere, although its surface was rather rough. The stone's color and appearance was similar to the ones found in Bosnia, but of course, the one in front of Mark was not as large as those. Mark touched the stone with his right hand, but strange enough, Mark could not feel anything strange with it. It was as if it was just a normal stone that was coincidentally put inside the pod. Of course, Mark would not think of that. Although rare, many mutated infected had mutagen stones in their brains. Even though Mark could not feel anything from the stone and the psi crystal was not reacting to it, it did not mean that the stone was a normal one. In any case, he needed to take it away and study it. Mark's sudden appearance immediately alerted the infected around the pod and swarmed towards him. However, not a single one of them managed to even touch the hem of his jacket, as he immediately picked the stone from the ground and vanished from the spot he stood. The infected were confused as to where their target vanished to, but it just took several seconds before they came back to their feast. After vanishing, Mark immediately returned towards the roof of the terminal. "Gerger, how is it?" May and Miracle were the first one to notice Mark returned, as the others were immersed in watching the battle between the two giants. "It's strange, it looked like a normal stone." Mark put the stone down while the others started to surround it. "The infected from the pod did not even mind me taking it. I expect that it will chase me or go hysterical if the stone is taken." Mark turned his head at the battle with a strange expression. He knew that the strange female infected noticed him when he appeared and took the stone, but she did not even try to chase him. There was not even a pint of killing intent. Rather, there was surprise on her face as he saw him, which turned to relief when he took the stone. It was as if that infected had a high level of intelligence. No, it would not be wrong to say that she had ego. After all what normal infected could show in their faces were rage, hunger, and their twisted, unrecognizable expressions. Looking at the situation below, just how many infected had already died in the short time Mark took the stone? The area around the nest already looked devastated from the fight. A lot of dead bodies of normal and weaker mutated infected littered the ground. There was already too many, and the ones that had their bodies smashed into meat paste were not included. After all, just the size of the foot and hands of the Alpha were as big as and as heavy as a wrecking ball. "What are we going to do next?" Colleen asked while watching the situation below. With the current state, there would be no way for them to kill those infected. Furthermore, the female infected was already physically strong to resist the besiegement of her enemies, even though there was several hundreds of infected attacking her at the same time. Her tentacles whipped normal infected into unrecognizable bits and pieces. The hands on the tentacles grabbed and crushed the mutated ones. It was all happening while her upper body contended with the Alpha. Her multitasking ability was rather high for an infected. Furthermore, unlike the Alpha that was attacking her randomly and throwing anything it could reach around towards her, the strange infected was able to read the Alpha's movements. "Let me try something first," Mark said as he vanished from the rooftop once again. This time, however, he charged towards the center of the fight. He approached the two giants up to a certain distance and landed on the roof of an airplane abandoned in the middle of the runway. Then, "Hey, can you understand me?" Mark shouted. Colleen, Edsel and Amihan on the roof of the terminal froze. Aphelia on the other hand slapped her forehead. On the other hand, the female infected turned her head towards Mark and ended up with her face punched by the Alpha due to being distracted. Whoops. Mark vanished from the airplane as a loading vehicle was thrown towards him and ended up crashing onto the airplane. Since Mark saw that surprised expression on the female infected, he thought that she had developed an ego to a certain extent. Sure enough, she did to some extent. As Mark moved closer to her position, enough that she was inside Mark's emphatic detection, Mark felt a consciousness inside her. Also when she turned her head, there was both surprise and confusion seeing Mark calling unto her. She was different from the normal infected. Unlike the alpha that immediately attacked by throwing something at Mark, the female did not try to do anything and was distracted from the fight instead. It made Mark have the impression that this creature was only fighting because she was attacked first rather than fighting because she wanted to. When Mark vanished from the airplane, he returned to the rooftop once more. "Your Majesty, just what are you doing?" Ophelia asked with an exasperated expression. "I'm just trying out something. Ophelia, come with me and try taking control of the Alpha." "Your Majesty, why?" Ophelia's voice vanished as Mark hurriedly grabbed her and vanished once more. The next time she appeared, she was falling above the head of the Alpha. "Wah!" she screamed as she tried her best to balance herself and fly with her wings. "Your Majesty!" Ophelia shouted while pouting as she regained her balance in flight. She was angry. Nevertheless, she started to try to control the Alpha. However, it was not easy as the Alpha had a higher intelligence compared to the other infected they encountered from the start. As Ophelia's ability activated, the Alpha who was entangled with the fight against the female infected froze for a second before it started to trash around. Its heavy arms pounded the ground and its large feet stomped craters on the runway. It was roaring wildly that even the female infected froze and backed off in fright. Since the Alpha was flailing randomly, she was not able to read its movements anymore and was also hit several times. Bam! The female infected tried to dodge a sudden wild flail of the Alpha but was sent off flying as she failed. She then fell on the ground. Her lower chest sunk in and it was obvious that she badly broke some of her ribs. While she was struggling to lift her body and whipped away the incoming infected with her tentacles, she heard steps by her side. There, she saw Mark approaching her. "Say, you can understand me, right?" Mark asked. Being stared by multiple eyes on the female infected's face felt uncomfortable, but he had to confirm things. To his surprise. "Gra, grr, grr." The female infected opened her mouth several times. She tried to speak, but it seemed that she was not able to and was only able to release faint growling sounds from her throat. She seemed disappointed and she touched her throat with her large hands. A sad expression was on her face as she was not able to convey what she wanted to say. "Fortunately for her, I see. You remember being human, right?" She heard Mark say, which opened her dozen eyes on her face as wide as she could. Tears started to drip on her face like a fountain. "Gra. Grr," she cried out. "Okay, I changed my mind. Want to come with me?" Mark said with great interest. What Mark said seemed to have ticked something in her and she started to make begging gestures and letting out growling sounds. He turned towards Ophelia on the air. "Ophelia, how long will that take?" "Your Majesty, please, don't rush me," she shouted back as she concentrated hard to take control of the Alpha. "All right then," Mark replied as he made his way towards the center of the runway. He raised his hand forward and the psi crystal shined comparable to the sun. The female infected seemed to be confused and just followed behind him while attacking the infected that came near with her tentacles. The moment the light shone from the psi crystal, dozens of buzzing sounds was heard and nail-sized pebbles from around the area flew towards his hand. "Yep, this is quite a lot." Mark smiled as he stuffed the mutagen stones into his pocket. "We're going," he said and grabbed the female infected by her left arm. The two vanished from the place. It did not take long and the Alpha calmed down, and with Ophelia's control, it also left the runway, leaving the other infected with nothing but the remains of the pods left behind. *******. No one but a single person knew about the clear liquid gushing out from several tanker trucks parked near the docking of Terminal 2. The liquid slowly spread around the airport, especially the nest. The infected feasted on the remains of the pods while splashing the liquid onto their feet and other places. Several minutes later, Flames and explosions engulfed the nest, leaving nothing but burnt debris and ashes after the flames were extinguished on their own more than a day later. Day 48 to 9:42 a.m. Baclaran Church, Redemptorist Road, Pasay City, Metro Manila. Hey, is this really possible? Colleen had already asked similar questions like this for the nth time after they left the airport. She was currently staring at the strange-looking woman that came out of that pod from the airport. Although she already confirmed herself that the woman could understand her, she was still in doubt. Her doubt was reasonable. The infected, even the biters that still had vital signs, were considered dead by the military. Failed mutators were also the same. It was because they already lost the ability to live lives similar to their past selves due to the lack or change in ego. Now, however, a living example of an infected that managed to regain her memories of her life as a human appeared. The common sense she cultivated since the apocalypse started shattered into pieces. "Can you snap into reality already?" Mark complained with a sigh. He was already getting tired of her questions. May, on the other hand, also looked interested, but rather than asking questions, she was trying to get closer to Miracle instead. It looked like she could not accept Miracle being shy towards her more than an infected regaining her memories as a human. At the side of the church, Edsel was checking his weapons. Although he had the same interest as the two girls, he knew that it was better to wait for answers to be given than asking for it. As a subordinate, he unknowingly gained the ability to observe what his boss liked and disliked. From his observations, Mark would get more annoyed if someone was to pester him about something. The good example was Colleen in her current antics. If she continued with this, it was very likely that Mark would stop paying attention to her. And it already started. Hey! Mark stopped paying attention already, and instead, he stared at the female infected he brought. The almost 3-meter-tall woman was silently sitting at the side. She sat while curling her tentacles backwards in order for her tentacles to not bother anyone and get on the way. She was currently holding the stone Mark took as if it was a treasure. In front of her were several sheets of old rusty-colored paper and a water-based black marker. Although she could understand Mark and the others, she could not speak, and thus, he came up with this idea. It was hard to find markers since most found were permanent ones that had already dried up, and luckily, he managed to find a water-based one. That was not the end of struggles. Due to her large hands, she was not used to writing with them, and she ended up writing almost illegible letters. Amy Florencia, that was her name. She was a pregnant woman on a departure flight when everything started. Due to everything happening too suddenly, she and the other passengers were trapped inside that airplane that got stranded in the middle of the runway. They would have survived in that airplane for some time, but there was a problem. The other passengers did not manage to stay put and opened the hatch after a day. That was the worst thing to happen when the number of mutated infected in the airport was increasing for some reason. Unable to escape their fate, all the passengers of that flight became infected, and obviously, she was not an exception. She was bitten on her hand but managed to hide inside one of the comfort rooms inside the airplane. After that, however, she had no recollection of what happened. The next thing she knew was that she woke up inside the pod submerged with an unknown liquid. Although she saw herself looking horrendous, she found that it was natural and did not think much of it. The thing that had most of her attention was the sphere stone that was under her body when she woke up. Although she did not know why, the first thing that entered her mind when she saw that stone was the child that was supposed to be in her womb. When she boarded that plane, she was 8 months pregnant. With a month that had passed, she should have given birth already if the outbreak did not happen. The bulge in her stomach was gone, and she found that stone instead. It might not be logical, but there was a possibility that she was not wrong either. After all, the blood children were also born from the infected, even though they were cultured in a sense. All right, I won't ask about her anymore, but are we really staying here? Colleen gave up asking about Amy and decided to ask about something else. One of the worst places to go and stay at in a zombie apocalypse was churches. First, many people would try to go there to pray for salvation, and places with churches were usually crowded with people. The other reason was because churches had too many openings where infected could pass through or see people inside. In fact, when they arrived at this church, There was a lot of rotting dead bodies on the floor. The floor was also painted with blood here and there. The chairs were in disarray and the stained glass windows were all shattered into pieces. Fortunately, they managed to sweep corpses out easily with Amy's tentacles and used the chairs to block the unnecessary entrances and windows. Normally, Mark would also not choose a place like this as a temporary base. However, aside from the church being surrounded by parking lots that could make it easier to detect intruders, they needed a big place that could fit Amy, Shaflar and the Alpha. Normal buildings and houses would not be able to accommodate their large bodies, and keeping them outside was a no-go, especially for Amy. Mark found a new creature and she was an interesting one. Of course, he would treat her with care. She was an infected that managed to regain consciousness. Anyone would be interested in her. Well, if they did not attack her on sight. After all, her current appearance was just hideous in human sense. It's fine here already. We have a lot of advantage in this place. Mark replied. The compound of Baclaran Church was literally beside Bay City, with just the width of 12 lanes of roads which belonged to the service road and Roxas Boulevard. In fact, the compound was located just at the area directly between the north and south district of Bay City. Due to this place being too near to Bay City, the infected in the area had been mostly dealt with, and all those that would wander around would go directly to Bay City that was bustling with people. Another advantage was that even though this place was close, the front area of the compound which faced Bay City was covered with quite a large number of trees and plants which masked the main church from the eyes of the guards in Bay City. The most advantageous thing was that they would be able to come and go without problems, and Mark could immediately return if there was an emergency while he was outside. It was very convenient since he wanted to sneak in and out of Bay City. Gerger, May, who finally had Miracle sitting on her lap, spoke. Is it possible that Amy is the same as Jeanette? Possible. Mark nodded as he also had the same idea. Amy's appearance was like a mix of multiple things. If she was the same as Jeanette that seemed to have the ability to absorb abilities of mutators they ate, it was very possible. As for how Amy was able to regain her consciousness, it was still debatable. It could be that Amy already ate enough mutators for her to gain consciousness, since Jeanette was also gaining hers after she ate the mutator from the gang at Firenze. Or her mutation inside the pod was heavily influenced by the spiritual energy the Great One released. Unfortunately, even if Mark wanted to experiment, only the first circumstance could be tried out, since they needed the Great One for the second theory. Is your injury okay now? Mark turned to Amy and asked. Right now, she was wearing some curtains draped onto her body. Due to her upper body's size, which was more than double of a human's, it was hard to find something that would fit her and could only use those curtains. However, she did not really seem to mind being naked. Probably, being an infected changed this mindset. From the time she got out of the pod to the time that they reached the church, she did not have a problem with it. To Mark's question, Amy touched her ribs and nodded. Although her regeneration was not as strong as Mark's, it seemed that her body was able to heal on its own. A problem came up and Amy was always looking down instead of looking straight at anyone. It was because even Amy found that her dozen eyes looking at someone kind creepy after looking at a mirror. ******* Day 48 to 12:37 p.m. Military Residences, Bay City, Pasay City, Metro Manila. Mom, cheer up. The young miss should be fine. Odette handed a glass of cold juice while trying to appease her mother. Siegfried was also in the room looking at his mother with worry. Since when Odalina returned last night, she had been in a bad mood. Learning what happened, everyone in their group who was left in Bay City had their hearts in turmoil. It was not because May was the central figure of the group, but because May was close to everyone here, especially the women. And even if she was not, a sudden disappearance of a comrade would leave anyone devastated. Among everyone here, Odalina had it worst. It might just be her reigning trait as a mutator, her deal with Fried, or because of her upbringing. No matter which reason, she already committed herself to be Mark and May's servant. She always stood beside May, Abigail and Iola more than she was with her children, although she did not neglect her duties as a mother. A bad mother would not be a good servant to her masters, and she knew that. Together with Abigail and Iola, They protected May from her fears, especially from other men with ill intentions. Yesterday, however, she failed to protect May and she was taken away. The worst part of it, she heard that Senator Estrada was using May's abduction to start harassing the military for their incompetence. May had been an icon in Bay City due to her beauty and prowess. Her being abducted was a huge blow to the trust the people had towards the military. Odalina wanted to leave and search for May and did not care about the senator anymore, but there was no way she knew where to start. There was also no way for her to leave Abigail and Iola that was under her care. Thinking about all those things, her mood worsened. Her appetite was even impacted that she had not eaten anything until now. In the least, she was drinking the juice Odette and Siegfried gave her from time to time. After their mother drank the juice, Odette and Siegfried left the room. The two knew that their mother just needed time to sort her mind alone. The moment her children left and closed the door, Odalina sighed. She knew that she should not be behaving like this, but she could not help it. "Young miss, how am I going to face master now?" she murmured. That was when, Odal, she froze before shaking her head. "I must be getting crazy. I'm starting to hear the voice of the young miss," she murmured with a bitter expression. And then, Odalina felt two hands wrap her body from her back. "Sorry, Odal. We made you suffer for our plans." Odalina slowly turned her head to the side to see May's face leaning on her left shoulder. She was about to shout when May blocked her lips with her finger. "Don't shout. We sneaked in secretly." When May said, "We," she pointed behind. There, tears came out of her eyes. For a long time, she saw the person he vowed to serve. Since May told her not to shout, she could only bow her head. In her mind, she shouted, "Master. Day 48 to 1:02 p.m. Military Residences, Bay City, Pasay City, Metro Manila." "Seriously, you don't have to cry like that. You look like an elementary school girl that got bullied by her classmates," Mark said with a bitter smile while he stood beside the door of the room. Hearing that, Odalina pouted, but she could not refute it either. She was currently sitting on the edge of her bed beside May, who was hugging her while she wiped the traces of her tears with her reddish eyes. It took more than 15 minutes to appease Odalina while Mark and May told what really happened. Odalina felt displeased as she worried a lot for the circumstances that was actually under control, and it was just everyone was left out and used as tool to start a heinous plan. She also realized why the senator was too early to use what happened to pressure the military. It was because he knew everything that happened from the start as the mastermind. At least, the young miss is not really in any trouble, Odalina thought as she tried to smile. She also looked towards the two others that her masters brought with them, a fairy and a little girl. Although she was surprised by the existence of the fairy, her distressed heart failed to show that emotion. Thump. Thump. The door was knocked while they were still in their conversation, which made Odalina worried. Her masters said that they will hide themselves for a while and no one else should know they were here. However, Mark only put his index finger over his lips and slowly opened the door while standing behind it. There, two little girls entered. The older one stood behind the younger and was pushing her to go into the door faster and closed the door. Iola had Keeper's memories and ability, allowing her to know that Mark had appeared because of the psi crystal on his arm. Knowing that Mark had already returned, she brought Abigail, who was also sad about May's abduction. Although she still had the calm expression she always had, her eyes were red from crying too much. "Gail, look." Abigail was looking down at the floor this whole time, so Iola had to urge her to look forward. When Abigail looked towards the bed where Odalina and May sat, her calm face turned into surprise and glee as she literally charged forward. "Mama." May immediately caught her. Luckily, the distance of the door and the bed was not far and Abigail was not able to gather more momentum and speed, or it could have hurt both of them. The little girl's face was immediately stained with tears of joy. Abigail started rubbing her face on May's body like a cat while the latter tried to pacify the little girl with a gentle smile on her face. On the other hand, Iola, who was also an accomplice of the plan, stood by the door and looked at the person she expected to be here. "You're Ma Zhao." Iola tried to bow down and greet Mark in the way that people of Arielis greeted their king, but she was not able to finish as her forehead was flicked without mercy. I already told you that you are not keeper, so you don't have to do that. Iola, who held her forehead with both hands and with teary eyes, looked up to Mark with a pout. Who am I? Mark lowered his body and asked face to face with Iola. Papa, Iola said with embarrassment. It was then that her head was caressed gently. Finally unable to hold back her feelings as a child, she hugged Mark and started to cry. Papa, receiving the embrace, Mark smiled. Although he had Freed's memories and Iola had Keeper's, they were still different people and the father and daughter should not become them. It was different from reincarnation. Although the memories were in their mind now, it was not their own at the same time. Abigail noticed her older sister hug someone behind and was surprised. She stared at Mark, who also turned his head towards her. Abigail looked at Mark, trying to recollect her memories, and her eyes grew wider. May slowly let the little girl go and allow her to go towards Mark with slow steps as things happening right now registered in her young mind. Papa? Abigail spoke with uncertainty and a warm hand was placed onto her head. Took you long enough. Mark said with a bitter expression. You little girl is the one who forced me to be your papa, but you dare to forget me? They only spent time together for a week at the start of the outbreak and were far apart for more than a month already. Mark could not blame the little girl. Iola was a bit different since her mind became more mature due to Keeper's memories, but Abigail was still a normal little girl in mind and heart. Feeling the familiar warmth in those hands, tears started to fall even more from Abigail's eyes as jumped in to join Iola in his embrace. Papa. The little girl cried and started rubbing her face on Mark's chest as if trying to mark him once more. On the side, Emihan was teary-eyed as she watched the two lonely children reunite with Mark and May. Miracle, on the other hand, seemed to have another thing on mind as she stared at Iola and Abigail. Miracle then walked towards Mark and jumped to cling on his neck. Father? Papa? The blood child princess was confused. Papa? Iola and Abigail noticed Miracle and stared with both askance and confusion. The three then started to call unto Mark as he was not responding. Papa? Iola looked at his face, trying to ask if something was wrong. Papa? Abigail called out as he was not saying anything. Papa? Miracle looked at the two girls, trying to know why they were calling her father, Papa. Hearing that word being repeated up the nth time, Mark turned to May and Odalina, who was watching. I know that I should be happy about this, but Mark's face turned serious. When did my princesses got replaced by aliens? The atmosphere in the room froze. Several seconds later, Odalina could not hold it anymore and started laughing. All her stress and distress was washed away seeing Mark's predicament as he was surrounded by cute Papa aliens. May smiled with a warm expression, but the three girls could not accept being called as aliens, making them call out to Mark even more, but now with displeased tones. Luckily, Emihan had contained the sound inside this room, or this boisterous event was enough to alert even the floors above and below the room they were currently in. Day 48 to 3:22 p.m. Military Laboratories Intensive Care Unit, Bay City, Pasay City, Metro Manila. One of the busiest places in Bay City, the laboratory held the most important things in this settlement. There were infected specimens, research materials, high-end laboratory equipment, and the fruits of labor of the scientists working hard in this place. On the first floor, however, there was an area that served as Bay City's only military hospital to treat emergencies. Although they should be kept in a separate building as the laboratory held a lot of secrets and even dangerous chemicals, the building that would serve as the next hospital was still in preparation. Another thing was that a lot of unexpected circumstances could happen due to the presence of mutagen, and that was why the people brought here needed to be near the laboratory as much as possible. A smaller section of the hospital area was made into an intensive care unit. Now, however, there was only one person in the ICU right now. At this time, a black mist moved across the hallways. The mist was on plain sight and should have been easy to spot because the walls, the floors and the ceilings of the laboratory were all painted in white. There were also people in the hallway. The doctors, scientists, assistants and other personnel were moving back and forth the hallways. Nevertheless, none of them were able to see the mist that was currently invisible. On the cameras installed on the laboratory, however, a slight distortion of light was detected, but it was not that noticeable. "Is this the right way?" Mark whispered to May as the two materialized from the mist. Of course, they were still invisible in the eyes of the people around. "Yes. I've been here several times. It's just that she's placed in the most secure part of the building," May replied. "Well then, let's go." Poof! The two vanished and the mist continued to move in fast speed. Soon, they managed to find their target destination. The room was being guarded by several people dressed in military fatigues. Looking at these soldiers, they were the elite among the soldiers. In the eyes of the people, it could be said that it was a waste just to make these skilled soldiers guard a room in the ICU, but if they knew who was inside, they would shut up immediately. Since the room was tightly sealed, Mark and May waited for a while until a doctor came to check the patient inside. Using the distortion in space, Mark and May slipped into the room. There, they saw the person they were looking for. "She looked thinner than the last time I saw her," Mark said while looking at the patient on the bed. "It's already more than a month after all," May replied as she caressed the patient's hair. The girl on the bed was no other than Angeline Perez, General Perez's only daughter. To protect her friend, Paula May Clarence, from the attack of the unknown when they left Bacor City Mall, she injured herself severely and ended up in coma despite her wounds already healed from the evolution of her body. Her vital signs were normal, but she never woke up. Up until now, no one was able to pinpoint the cause and the study was still ongoing. Since she was a good friend that stood to protect May back in the mall, Mark would not hesitate to help her either. Mark touched the unconscious girl's forehead and his hands glowed with milky white light. The moment he entered the room, he knew the problem as his empathic ability detected Angeline's consciousness. As she was in great pain and shock during the time her body evolved, her consciousness was not able to handle it and entered deep sleep while weakened. Of course, the milky white light would not be enough to wake her up. It could only nourish her sleeping soul. Mark then made two crystals appear in front of him. One was an empty, mental crystal, and the other was a physical crystal, with a black orb inside. Seeing the crystal, May was surprised. She already knew the purpose of the crystals since Mark did not hide it from her, and that was why the reason for her surprise was different. "Gerger, isn't that, it is. The crystal that came from Black Devil, since Angeline seems to always get hurt when protecting someone, I'll give her this one. I already had a lot to choose from after all. I won't mind just giving this," Mark replied. The physical crystal in his hands now contained that black skin transformation that was even able to block bullets. It came from Black Devil, the right-hand man of Chameleon who orchestrated May's suffering at that time and was also the culprit behind her abduction several years ago, which almost took Mark and May's lives. Soon, light enveloped the room when the two crystals entered Angeline's body. The heart rate monitor detected the sudden change in her body and started beeping irregularly. The sudden light in the room and the change of beeping sound from the heart rate monitor alerted the soldiers guarding outside. Some of them hurriedly stormed into the room while a few immediately left to call a doctor. Mark and May used that opportunity to slip out, leaving the panicked soldiers inside. There was no need to stay here as Mark was sure that the crystals would not do any harm aside from the little suffering as the changes in her body commenced. Trying this loose end, Mark and May smiled at each other. Holding hands together, they vanished from the laboratory in a puff of black mist. Now that the good thing passed, the terror in Bay City was about to ensue.